So I think there are, very difficult in a very diverse role, such as my role within Counter Terrorism Policing, to just refine that to one event, because there were so many. And of course we must remember that what happened in 2018 was in large part the consequence of activities that happened in 2017. So for example, the inquest into the Westminster attacks. I was very heavily involved in the post-attack reviews on behalf of CT Policing, working with Sir David Anderson and MI5 at Changes. What really struck me about those inquests, and you think you know it, I knew the operational detail, and I kept very closely connected, as you would imagine, to what happened to the victims, and there were many, many victims, not just, of course, those who died. But seeing that played out in the inquest and the heartbreaking stories just brings that all back and makes it very, very real for everybody involved. So that was a really key moment for me, seeing how some of those recommendations that we have made in the post-attack reviews could make things better in the future was a defining moment for me. In particular, the sheer audacity of that attack, with the flagrant disregard for the consequences to the wider public and the upheaval that caused in the small town of Salisbury for many, many months. And in fact, those impacts are still being felt now, and some of those are unseen impacts, like the impacts on business and such like. But not just the flagrant disregard, the audacity of it, but actually, I mean, the painstaking work by the police and MI5 to detect two of the suspects, and probably more. In my view, there will probably be more to come on that. But actually then the ridiculous stories that the Russians expected us to believe about the accounts of those individuals, I think they were defining moments, because I was not in counter-terrorism policing when the Litvinenko inquiry took place. I was working in organised crime in those days, but I remember it really, really well. And there were shades of that, but there felt like there was something different about these. And watching the response of the local agencies and the police in Wiltshire, it's a small police force, they really stepped up to the plate. And one has to admire their resilience in the management of that post-incident response, trying to get Salisbury back to normal. And then, of course, the tragic death of Dawn Sturgis a matter of months later. I mean, the utter tragedy that ensued as a consequence of what happened all those months before that. Who could have predicted it? But actually, that state-sponsored activity, fascinating, unbelievable in many senses, that could take place in a small place like Salisbury, or indeed in the United Kingdom. But the sheer resilience of the communities in battling through and getting Salisbury back to normal, they're outstanding moments that will stay with me for a long time. So the first point, and this is something that we do not speak about enough, frankly, is let's not underestimate our intelligence agencies, counter-terrorism policing, and a whole host of other partners who are engaged in working against these threats on a daily basis. Let's not underestimate that. They are utterly brilliant. The relationship between them is incredibly close. It's cohesive, mutually appreciative of each other's positions, and we're in a good place. I'm absolutely sure of that, and the public should be greatly reassured by that. What I would also say is you can't guard against every single threat. It's not possible. We did in counter-terrorism policing an awful lot of exercising and preparedness activity to counter some of these issues, but you're never going to think of every single one of those. It's rare, and we must also remember that was an extremely unusual, rare attack. And I think all of the preparedness in the world is not going to necessarily stop every single attack. And it's much the same in any other form of terrorism. You can prepare, you can seek to prevent, which of course is the first thing that we should all be doing. But actually, our response in the aftermath of that was extremely impressive and continues to be so. Clearly, we are facing an unprecedented level of threat, and that has not changed since the threat level was raised to severe back years ago now. And I remember at the time thinking, hopefully this won't last long. but we're still there, and we've been higher. We've been too critical on a number of occasions. So I think that we're realistic about this is a dynamic threat. The velocity of it, the scale, the complexity is different from what we've experienced before. But again, I come back to the brilliance of our intelligence agencies and the police in countering that. But we have got some other dilemmas to face this year, as we are currently, this year and indeed next year. The return of foreign terrorist fighters and the return of those individuals who have also travelled to those conflict zones and become engaged in things that perhaps they hadn't intended to when they first travelled out to those. And some of those include children who have been brought to conflict zones, not of their own volition, and not having made a choice to travel, but actually have been brought into that scenario. We may, in fact, we're likely to have to manage the consequences of that within our communities as some of those seek to return. I am very much in favour of exercising the royal prerogative, and indeed we have done that on numerous occasions successfully, and I sincerely believe we must hold our nerve on that point and not be convinced to move from that position unless there are exceptional circumstances attaching to an individual's case. And of course we exercise that discretion on a daily basis anyway. So we have to consider what that threat looks like next year. We're also going to have the inquests on the London Bridge attacks. We are going to hear the most brave stories from first responders and members of the public, members of the police service, ambulance service, and the list goes on, which again just are humbling to listen to. So we're going to have that next year too. But also, how do we manage the volume activity? So terrorism as a volume business. I don't like having to even say those words, but that's the reality, and that's what we are going to be facing next year. The key for me is multi-agency working in true partnership, which is mutually beneficial. It's no good one party winning in a partnership scenario and the other party feeling like they are really a bit part player. This has to be a whole system approach, and that has to be with the private sector. And I'm bound to say that, of course, now that I'm sitting on the other side of the fence. But I have always believed that the private sector hold many of the solutions that we require to tackle what is an evolving, fast-moving, dynamic threat, which is multifaceted. I guess, for me, I have always, throughout my policing career, worked extremely closely with private sector and government sector organisations, third sector and because I have always believed that the solutions do not lie with one agency. And we're seeing that with violent crime and knife crime. It's a whole system approach, and we've all got a part to play, including communities, parents and in the education of kids. So I've always believed that. So I guess it's not completely strange for me, therefore, to feel that as a member of the private sector now, I have a part to play in supporting law enforcement, government and others to make us stronger and to be able to thwart attacks in the future. So I have been incredibly surprised at how I have transitioned into this role. I left 30 years of law enforcement with a great smile on my face, having had the most fantastic opportunities given to me, having had the exposure to the most incredible, dedicated professionals, not just in policing, but they're everywhere in policing at all levels, from the most junior up to some of the most senior officers and everything in between. But actually, it's broader than just that, and I have been incredibly privileged to see that across MI5 in particular, and the way that they nurture talent and they allow people to innovate. And that's, I guess, why my transition has been quite easy, because when you come to an organisation like Viacom, it is almost a mirror of that. So innovation, creativity, getting the best from your people, allowing them to be used, to be themselves in an inclusive environment is everything that actually the police and law enforcement agencies strive towards. And in some senses, it might be slightly easier in the private sector to allow that to proliferate. And that's what I'm experiencing at the moment. Great diversity in my role, And that was essential for me because actually I had an incredibly diverse role before. So having a diverse role with brilliant leadership here that allows people to innovate, to be creative. I'm surrounded by creativity here. My goal in the next 12 months is to try to bring some of that back into law enforcement. Obviously we deal with media content, but there are many other ways in terms of our social responsibility approach within Viacom that we can also seek to do good back into the public sector and for us to work more closely together. And what you see there is partnerships, both old and new, being tried and tested, and new technologies on display to enable private sector, public sector to come together, to solutionise together. That's what's really exciting for me. The opportunity for experts from the security and protective security world in particular to come together to share good practice. My note of caution is do not do that on your own, law enforcement. I have seen it from the other side. The true benefit is having the private sector in the room with you. That comes with risk, but it's a risk that is absolutely worth taking. We must do that together as we go forward, because the threats that we face are multifaceted, and therefore what we need is a range of different options. The public sector have some of those options that they can take, but actually when you add that together with private sector solutions, what you've got is an immensely potent mix of people. So I am hugely excited at the opportunity to come back and to be with the advisory board is a very, very great honour for me, and I'm absolutely delighted to have been asked to do so. With over 40 police forces able currently to procure their own solutions, you are going to get a mixed bag of solutions, some of which will work and some of which will spectacularly fail. I think that the government, and in particular the Home Office, must show leadership here. They must take the reins on this to assist with policing. I have seen over 30 years within the police service enormous change, an absolute willingness to be more efficient, more effectiveness, and I have seen that graphically. But police forces are really struggling funding wise. You cannot ignore that fact. We have got lower numbers on the front line than we have had in previous years, with a growing and more diverse threat picture, and therefore we need leadership to be shown to assist policing in making good decisions, because you have some brilliant individuals within policing who are able to step up and manage risk really, really effectively. But the toolbox needs to be opened up to them, and they need to understand the range of things, what's good and what's bad, and what the evidence base is essentially for what we should use. And some of that will be, you have to sometimes try different things to get to your successful model. That requires us to be cognizant of the risk, to mitigate it where we can, but of course to take some risk at times, because this is public money that we are spending, and the public now, with accountability rightly where it is, and the public expecting delivery of good service, we have to try different things than we are now. And I think we have been constrained in the past. The opportunity is now there, as you rightly say, just taking technology. The speed of change in technology is flabbergasting. It's difficult sometimes to catch up with what's going on, never mind keep up with it in the future. But actually that should be our ambition, and I'm absolutely convinced that the leadership across policing has all of those desires to work together with some help and leadership from the Home Office in particular.